Well, look, welcome to UCL. I'm Michael Spence. I'm the President and Provost here. It is, this afternoon, a very UCL occasion. When this place was founded, it was founded really on two core values. The first was that everybody should be invited. At the time at which you had to sign the 39 Articles of the Church of England to go to Oxford or Cambridge, UCL was rather radically and shockingly saying, no, university education ought to be available to a much broader range of people. And that ethos of everybody's invited is one to which we try and remain true. But more particularly, there was a sort of sneer in our founders' voice when they thought about those other institutions. They were places of polite learning. UCL was to be a place of useful knowledge. And that deep ethos of solutions-oriented research and education that and research that brings together the disciplines and does so in partnership with people outside the university as well in. That's deep in our DNA. So it's not surprising that UCL is the home of the IIPP, and what a tremendous thing it is to celebrate both the 10th anniversary of Mariana's remarkable book and also the 5th anniversary of the founding of the IIPP. If you identify the problem right, and you get the right people at the table, and they have the right attitude, a solutions-focused attitude, extraordinary things can happen. And when Mariana lit that torch 10 years ago, reminding people of how that was true, it was no surprise that the idea caught hold so quickly, or that the work of the IIPP has been so successful over the last 5 years. We're proud that she and it call UCL home and think that in so many ways the work of the Institute really reflects what we're all about and have been about for almost 200 years. And so it's a tremendous privilege to welcome you to UCL this evening and her to the podium to give the keynote address. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. It is absolutely not a coincidence that, is my mic on? Yes. That we're at UCL, because as Michael said, this has actually always been a challenge-oriented university. Everyone's now hopping on that bandwagon, but if you think of Bentham, one of the intellectual founders of UCL, the idea that actually well-being has to be at the center of how we design a political economy, and how well-being requires so many different disciplines to actually work together, also to debate what that means, but also something that we hold very dearly, different government departments to work on that. So it's not siloed within one little area. This is really something that UCL has thrived on for 200 years. And so for me, it was a huge honor when, if I can also name check two people that were very critical to IIPP, David Price, who at the time was the Vice Provost for Research, and Alan Penn, who was the Dean of the Bartlett. When they asked me to come to UCL, it was not only, I was very proud to have been asked, but it really, really felt like it was a fitting home. And the fact we're also in the Bartlett, which is the School of the Built Environment, which isn't just about architecture, but really is debating what does it mean to build an environment where that very environment is a result of all sorts of decisions and interactions, none of which are deterministic, but are fruits of agency in the system. That also has felt very appropriate. So this is an evening where we have sort of a double whammy. We have the 5th anniversary of the Institute, which we actually launched in this room 5 years ago. Even the drinks that you're all welcome to later, we had downstairs in the very place. We also, later I'll introduce our magnificent panel, but we also hosted the Commission for Mission-Oriented Innovation and Industrial Strategy in this room. But it's also the 10th anniversary of my book, The Entrepreneurial State. And by the way, I don't know if everyone knows the story about why there's a pussycat here and a lion there. Also because the new editions kind of got rid of that first title, as books do as they evolve. It's actually been translated, I think, in close to 20 languages. But that's because John Maynard Keynes, back in the day when he was trying to help Roosevelt steer what at the time was what we call today an economic recovery, he wrote him a letter and said, we got a problem. We have a problem. These businesses that we require to invest and this recovery that we're trying to design to help steer, a stimulus package so we don't get deeper and deeper into the depression, the businesses, we think that they're lions, they're wolves, they're tigers, but actually they're often pussycats. And he didn't mean it as an insult. He wasn't saying they're gerbils, they're hamsters, they're pussycats, they're not lions, wolves, and tigers. What he actually meant is something that I don't think modern day Keynesians have reflected on enough, which is if you have a lion in a cage that wants to roar and wants to do great things, then all you really need to do is take away the cage, take away, facilitate, maybe get rid of some of those terrible rules that are constraining the poor lion. If instead you have a pussycat, perhaps one of the key roles of a recovery program and of government policy is actually to increase the expectations, increase what he called animal spirit, so even the willingness to roar. And I'm going to come back to that word roar in just a minute. So R-O-A-R, because that's actually become a framing that we use in the Institute to go beyond the very siloed way that we've thought about governments. But I do want to say that as part of the celebration, the 5-year celebration, I am also incredibly honored to be working with 60 incredible people. They are all under our roof at 11 Montague Street on the corner, the southwest corner of Russell Square. In just 5 years, having 60 people under that roof has also been a growth challenge. As we all know, organizations have to grow in a careful way. But also we have hosted now our 4th cohort of MPA students, 78 this year from all over the world. Can we see a raise of hands? Amazing. Let's give you all a... And they are absolutely the pillar of the Institute, as are our 24 PhD students. How many PhD students in the room? Oh, they're all studying. Okay, yay! And Asker here and Simone, I don't think Simone is here today, but they have also just finished their PhDs and gotten their doctorates in the last months. But really the students are absolutely the core, not just because that's a nice thing to say and everyone would say that, why not? But actually because it's incredibly true. Why? Because the reason I set up the Institute was that the Entrepreneurial State message, which was catching on, it almost became, I don't want to say a household word, like the LIBOR rate became a household word during the financial crisis, not so much in that setting, but it definitely was taking off. Governments were interested in it. I found myself giving talks. There was, I often say that I'd walk in as an economist, come out as a life coach because the message was so positive amongst what I think continues to be in many parts of the world a bit of a depressed civil service. Because if at best you're seen as a facilitator of someone else creating value, it's not a very positive message. So I really grew to believe that the only way for the entrepreneurial state message, which we'll be debating tonight, because there's many different ways to interpret it, could get solidified and practiced and experimented with and hence progress and move on, beyond what I even kind of understood it to be initially, was if we could ground it in the training of the civil service itself. Ground it in the training of the people that both work in government and with government. And so the MPA for us was really important, the Master's in Public Administration, because it's about really rethinking leadership, rethinking value creation within the state, but also kind of that need to be a bit crazy and nutty and to sandbox policies. What does that look like? What's the kind of curriculum that allows that risk-lovingness, not only in the venture capital community, but also within the state? And we'll come back to that as well later. And the idea that actually new theory, right, about what the state is for, so you already see some words up here, public purpose, public value, market shaping instead of just market fixing, needs to be practiced in order to advance, meant that we very quickly were trying to do something that I think is quite hard, but again, it's really our motto, to link the new theory with the new practice and to learn the difficulty on the ground, right? Think of new forms of development banks, outcomes-oriented procurement, even that notion of kind of regulatory sandboxing, the experience around that, bringing it back to the theory itself, so that what we call practice-based learning and practice-based theorizing, but also bringing that learning to the curriculum, right? So that kind of, that triangle there of new theory, new practice, and new curriculum that's outside of the old way of thinking about education and the civil service, which has come to us from public choice theory, new public management, market failure fixing theory. What is the new? What is the new type of theoretical framing that's required in order actually to truly co-create and co-shape our economies, instead of continue to think that it's somehow, value created in the private sector, and then on this side, that value can be redistributed, it can be regulated, it can be enabled, it can be de-risked, all these really boring words that IIPP has kind of set out to change. So that's really our goal, and it's been amazing, again, to grow as we have over the last 5 years, but especially to see the impact. And the impact wasn't just to have impact because we have something called the research assessment exercise. It was to have the impact precisely so the learning on the ground can continue to feed this new theorizing. So whether it was helping the European Union redesign its innovation program away from just having kind of a sectoral or technology-focused policy towards supporting sectors and technologies around challenges and missions, or a mission-oriented approach, whether it was working with First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who I'll introduce in a minute, in her government on setting up a whole new public bank in Scotland, the Scottish National Investment Bank, to provide patient, long-term strategic finance to those companies that are willing to work around really difficult goals, working with British Columbia around their industrial strategy, and thinking very much also about issues around co-creation, given their own real challenges with indigenous communities that have been left behind, so whose voice is at the table when we set up the British Columbia Investment Bank, working with Camden, our very local partner. We all sit in Camden today, around the Camden Renewal Commission, which I co-chaired with not with Nicola Sturgeon, with Georgia Gould, another wonderful woman, and working to set up the new Camden Wealth Fund, which we might, thank you, Dan Wright, who's been kind of helping us foster that from inside IIPP with the Camden team, as well as the Camden procurement. Anyway, I could go on and on, but all this impact, which you can read about, by the way, in our 5-year impact report, for us has been very much because it's only by trying, and also by trying to have that kind of a radical impact, because we need to steer economies in a radically different way, that we can learn how to do that new political economy. And then again, that feedback. And Keynes's famous quote, that practitioners on the ground are just trying to get the job done, but are often slaves of defunct economic theory, is something that we take very seriously in terms of what is then the new theory we require. So coming back to that kind of roar, those 4 letters, what we've tried to do is to kind of rigorize, make more rigorous this new concept of market shaping. And those 4 letters stand for something for us. And it's something that we really hope that within perhaps 5 or, our next 5-year anniversary, so our 10th anniversary, we will also have textbooks for all NPA classes around the world that can also use this curriculum. So the first R is about roots and directionality. This idea that somehow we're there just to level the playing field doesn't make much sense when the economy is not inclusive, it's not sustainable, is ultra-financialized. So what does it mean to actually set a direction for the economy? What does it mean to do so, not top-down, because that would kill innovation. It's really hot in here, isn't it? I guess there's no windows we can open. That's not a window? No. To set a direction for economy, which then, though, enables real bottom-up experimentation. My book, Mission Economy, looked at that, what it meant to have a really clear goal for the moon landing, to the moon and back in a short amount of time, but then really organizing all those different tools along the way that could stimulate that bottom-up innovation in order to achieve that goal. Many of those innovations failed, some succeeded, and those that succeeded were critical to the mission itself. Camera phones, foil blankets, baby formula. That's how growth happened. So growth is not a mission. Growth is not the direction. The direction is what kind of growth, inclusive and sustainable, and by setting really bold directions around climate, around becoming more prepared for the next pandemic, as hopefully we will be. I have thoughts about that, as does the council that I just ran for the World Health Organization. Are we more prepared? I'm not sure. So those kinds of goals, if they can really stimulate collective intelligence, collaboration between lots of different partners, ultimately growth is a spillover. Commercialization itself is a spillover, and where so many countries, I think, get it wrong is when commercialization and growth is the mission itself. This is something, by the way, we've been talking to Keir Starmer's team, who has actually been, I think, quite influenced by our work, but the fact that one of the 5 missions for labor is growth, we just tried to unpack growth as an outcome versus growth as the mission itself. The O, organizations, organizational capabilities. What does that mean to take as seriously in the public sector what we, of course, take in the private sector, which is those dynamic, creative abilities to be flexible, to be agile, to think out of the box. Think of the MBA courses, Masters in Business Administration courses, those really interesting names for those courses: strategic management, decision sciences, organizational behavior. Think of the textbooks that are written, rejuvenating the mature corporation. Why should you rejuvenate the mature corporation? Because corporations, when they get large and clunky and bureaucratic, if they're going to continue to create value, they need to rethink themselves. They need to do a multi-divisional IBM structure 30 years ago, GM structure. What does that mean for the public sector? Why is it that when the public sector gets large and bureaucratic, we just roll our eyes and say, oh, bureaucracy, red tape, Kafka, right? So being just as ambitious about intra-organizational dynamism within public institutions is really important. My co-director, one of my 2 co-directors, David Eves, Rainer Cattell, where's Rainer? Is here, his wonderful book. Where are you? There you are. His new book called Why Entrepreneurial States Need Bureaucracy. That whole idea of a creative bureaucracy is very important as an idea, but what does it mean for the training? In fact, one of the core pillars in our NPA is called creative bureaucracies. So that's a huge issue, and I really think it's one of those that we haven't invested enough in. The reason that Rosie Collington and I just wrote the book, The Big Con, How the Consulting Industry Has Infantilized Our Governments, Weakened Our Businesses, and Warped Our Economies, is that unfortunately we haven't been investing within the civil service. We have outsourced a lot of that capacity. And the key learning by doing, trial and error and error and error, which we know is critical to learn how to ride a bike, but also to learn how to create value. Why don't we allow that kind of learning by doing within the public sector, where as soon as it makes a mistake, it's on the front page of the newspaper, but also we're not investing within those kinds of creative training programs that allow agility, flexibility, outcomes orientation, dynamism, welcoming of uncertainty. The A of ROA, assessment and evaluation. If we are going to be ambitious around the moonshots of the future in terms of climate neutrality, carbon neutrality, around well-being, around vaccinating the world instead of vaccine nationalism, in terms of reducing the digital divide, all these really important missions, how do we evaluate the effect, the net result, beyond whether the mission was accomplished or not? Would they have ever even bothered going to the moon had someone done a cost-benefit analysis around it? Probably not. So these static metrics around cost-benefit, net present value, need themselves to be rethought, and that's why one of the coolest things we did was also to work with the treasuries in this country Green Book, rethinking those very metrics. What would it look like to have dynamic metrics around spillovers, right? If going to the moon and back, they required to experiment, and we had all those different innovations I talked about, of which some failed, some succeeded, but they were truly intersectoral, nutrition, materials, electronics, and software, to get there and back. What would that look like for climate? What would that look like for well-being strategies in terms of evaluating them on that cross-sectoral and economy-wide impact instead of that siloed impact? And the last R is rewards. How do we make sure that in and really kind of fostering an entrepreneurial state agenda, an investor first resort with strong kind of directionality, but not top down, and that bottom up experimentation to create value, which produces an economy that's more inclusive and sustainable? How can we truly make sure that those benefits are as wide and shared as the risk taking along the way? So how can we make sure we don't do what we have often done, which has been to socialize risks and privatize rewards? And on that front, 1 minute, Jesus. Okay, and on that front, what's been interesting in some of our work is working with different countries around conditionality. So how can we make sure that any program, whether it's a grant, whether it's a procurement contract, whether it's a loan program, embodies in it conditionality precisely about those benefits around common good criteria. We worked recently with Gina Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce in the United States, with the CHIPS Act. We started talking to them last summer about how to make sure that this kind of close to $400 billion scheme also embedded within it conditions about making sure that working conditions improved, that energy efficiency was achieved, and that the companies benefiting from such a program didn't just then give out the rewards to shareholders in terms of dividend payouts and share buybacks. We've had over close to $10 trillion be used for share buybacks in the last decade to boost stock prices, stock options, and executive pay. That financialization of the economy is precisely one of those mechanisms that has created higher inequality. So how can we make sure that the wealth created through this collective effort is reinvested back in to the economy, not extracted out and help to steer that economy to become more inclusive and sustainable? So I thought I had just spoken 5 minutes, but I guess not. So I will stop now. I'm going to introduce the panel in a minute. I think it's easier if we first show a video. It's just a 4-minute video of some of our friends, not family, friends who we've worked with around the world, including Prime Minister Mia Mottley, who couldn't be here, and they just sended us some love. So I think it'd be nice if we show it so you can actually see it from sitting there, and then I'll introduce our panel, and then we'll just have an all-out discussion about the nitty-gritty of putting the entrepreneurial state into action. Thank
you. Over the past decade, the ideas of the entrepreneurial state have been transformational in shaping global public policy narrative and direction. At UN Habitat, public sector-driven innovation is central to our work in promoting sustainable urban development across the globe.
To my dear sister Mariana, I'm so happy to join you today in celebrating this special event for the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. I can attest to the fact that you, the IIPP, and the concept of the entrepreneurial state that you've given birth to have quite literally been at the bedrock of our own transformative process. With your support, we have begun the process of systematically and comprehensively rethinking our role as a government, championing sustainable and inclusive growth and positioning our own country for this journey.
British Columbia is now a leader in the country. We had the strongest economic recovery in the entire country, and a lot of the ideas that we used were from Mariana.
Such a great thing to be able to count on these inspiring ideas about the entrepreneurial state, managing to get a much more relevant presence of renewable energy systems and trying to ensure that we can improve in management of fresh water.
The work that the IIPP did to analyze, to extract lessons, to share knowledge about how the public sector can architect innovation for the public good and develop deep partnerships with civil society, with scientists, with enterprises is more critical than ever.
In looking for an economics that reflects that idea, I chanced upon Mariana's book, The Entrepreneurial State, and I was so happy. That was a book that seemed to deal with real life, not with some sort of idealization, but with how things actually happen.
The main challenge Brazil have is to change the state to offer product, innovation, technology to society and to the planet. Mariana Mazzucato influenced all of the people that are thinking about a real development that includes people, the planet.
The work of Mariana with colleagues like David Willetts at the UCL Institute is now of continuing importance in making sure that that challenge-based approach is translated into the nitty-gritty of policy decisions, commitments, and actions which are necessary if a strategy is to have an impact on our economy, on our industry, and on our society.
We need to bring people who's willing to think out of the box. That's, in my opinion, why the entrepreneurial state is so critical to our thinking and solutions. To use data, intelligence, in public solutions, inclusive solutions.
Mariana and the IIPP have shifted thinking on the role a dynamic state can play in shaping and co-creating markets, and that includes the local state. And the results have been extraordinary. We've seen an unleashing of energy from our citizens, the public and private sector to solve some of the complex challenges we face.
Creation is nearly always cooperative. involves lots and lots of people.
It can be done, and it needs to be done. Congratulations to both Dr. Mazzucato and the Institute of Innovation and Public Purpose
For the work she's done, for her team, for partnering with us to support us in our economic recovery.
From missions-based local government to new approaches to procurement and community investment.
And I simply want you to have every success as you celebrate this very special occasion. On behalf of the people and government of Barbados, we say thank you.
Okay, so now the moment you've been waiting for to listen to our absolutely stellar panel. I can't remember which order, so I'm just going to read their bios and you will take their hands and put them in the right seat. Just make sure that person doesn't sue us because there's a very high chance they're going to fall off there. So, or stand maybe. Okay, good. So first, Alicia Bárcena. Where'd she go? There we go. She's currently the Mexican ambassador in Chile and was previously the executive secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Whew. ECLAC, or in Spanish, CEPAL. We worked together to launch a report last fall outlining a path forward for modern industrial strategies in Latin America and the Caribbean, oriented around climate and inclusion goals. Previously, she served as the coordinator of the UNDP, Latin America and Caribbean Sustainable Development Program. Alicia, you are one of the 4 rock stars today, and please don't fall. Good. Okay. So, Shiva Dustdar is the director and head of the European Investment Bank Institute, which the provost was reminding us has funded a big chunk of our campus, so be very nice to her. And the first woman to lead this pillar of the EIB Group's community and citizen engagement. She has over 28 years of experience in the financial industry, working for large private and public institutions. She previously led the EIB's Innovation Finance and Advisory Division, for which we wrote a report. It was one of those many reports you saw there, with a focus on green, digital, space, gender, smart, and health-related sectors. IIPP worked with the EIB in 2020 on a mission-oriented framework, God, I can't speak, for circular economy investments. And I must say, Shiva is one of the only people in the EIB that's trying to make it less worried about their AAA rating and to actually take the risks. You're going to get a letter tomorrow from your boss saying, tell her to never say that again. Nicola Sturgeon, of course, needs no introduction, an absolutely inspirational leader and one of the women leaders who've actually taken well-being seriously, putting it at the center of the macroeconomic framework in Scotland, but also at the center of the Scottish National Investment Bank that we worked with. She's a member of the Scottish Parliament representing the Glasgow Southside constituency and the former First Minister of Scotland, the longest serving and first woman First Minister. She joined the SNP at the age of 16, was elected as MSP representing the city of Glasgow in 1999, and has been campaigning for Scottish independence and leading truly transformative economic policy ever since. We worked together on the economic policy for Scotland and on the design of the mission-oriented and world-leading Scottish National Investment Bank, and we continue to talk around an incredibly interesting initiative, the ScotWind initiative, which I'm sure Nicola will talk about, which really puts that dynamic, symbiotic public-private partnership at the center of its design. And my dear friend, Lord Willetts, David Willetts, is the president of the Resolution Foundation. He was previously a member of Parliament between 1992 and 2015, and Minister for Universities and Science between 2010 and 2014. Together, we co-chaired, he's done many other things, but the one thing we did together was co-chair the UCL Commission for Mission-Oriented Innovation and Industrial Strategy, which was fantastic because we brought in academics from all over UCL, including a lot of people that I can't remember their names right now because I have food poisoning, which I should have told you before, but that's why I am also sounding a bit delirious. He's also chair of the UK Space Agency, and we need to continue to talk about space. Been working with ESA in recent years thinking about the new economy in space, and a board member of the UK Research and Innovation, UKRI, and a visiting professor at King's College London. Now, this is Take all the pictures you want, tweet away. This stage makes no sense for a panel, but so first of all, thank you so much for bearing with us. Was it in a movie? Many movies. This room was in many movies. It's a fantastic room, so we're very happy to be here, but it's a bit uncomfortable with a large panel, and I'm going to now sit here like Oprah Winfrey and ask them difficult questions, and it's good. You can't see my skirt, can you? No, very good, so it doesn't matter how I sit. So I thought it'd be good if we just start with an open question that you can all answer. How many minutes do they have? 2? 3? 3 minutes each, and then we're going to get into a dialogue. We're not doing Q&A, or are we doing? I should have asked them all these things before. No? No Q&A? Okay, sorry. So the general opening question is, why is the concept of the entrepreneurial state critical to tackle modern day challenges? But there is no one concept, right? So what does it mean for you? What has this looked like in practice based on your experience? And I should also say that this event tonight is happening over a 2-day period where we've invited mission-oriented innovation institutions through our MOIN network that today and tomorrow are asking this question. What are the challenges and opportunities of stepping outside of this little box of market failure fixing? What does it look like? Where are the problems? None of this is easy. It's not linear. So it's really that granular difficulty that would also be really good to highlight, not just success stories. So who do we start with? Anyway, why don't we start with Alicia and go like that? Yeah.
Very good. Well, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. I hope you can hear me well. First of all, thank you, Mariana. Thank you for inviting us to this celebration, because it's really a celebration. And we are here to celebrate your 10 years of this fantastic book, The Entrepreneurial State, and of course of your 5 years, because that book created this institution. I believe so, and yeah. I'm glad that the provost just mentioned that, because this book really has, in a certain way, produced many things. And I'm here to show you the one we produced together with Mariana. This is the one you saw there, but here's the book. So it does exist, and it's not only digital, it's physically. But what does this book tell us? And very quickly, because I know I have only probably 1 minute already, but anyway, but I come from Latin America, and what's the problem in Latin America? You will say, what's going on in Chile? You know, the left was winning and now the right is there. What is happening? We are confronting a polarized region, a bipolar region. But it's polarized not only politically, it's polarized economically, because there's one side that wants only the private sector to be the one who innovates and and the other side, and the state should be subsidiary. And this is precisely the fight we have today in Chile with the new constitution. And the other side that believes the public sector is the one who does everything. And that's Mexico, my home country. I can be fired after this, but that's okay. Because you see, the problem is that the Mexican current government feels that they have to do everything. Infrastructure, the airports, the whatever, with the military. Oh my God. So anyway, and the private sector feels a little bit sidelined. Okay, so what does this work did for the region? I mean, I'm telling you about the two extremes, of course. And then, but this book challenged the region to move from a natural resource extractive model in South America, for example, or Chile, or even Argentina, although Argentina and Brazil are quite industrialized countries, but they lost it a little bit on the way. For example, the vaccines showed us that this region had capacities and capabilities, but they lost them. Why? Because the economic model said, buy them, don't produce them, buy them. It's easier. You know, so a consumption-based economy should, and this book, what it says precisely is that we need a transformational change, building on the mission-oriented approach, which we really value very much, to make some goals for what you want. For example, if we want to eliminate plastics, which is something I really believe we should, but the problem is what the public sector can do, what the private sector can do. And I was telling our friends that, for example, Starbucks, believe it or not, in all South America is a Mexican company. You didn't know that, right? But it's Mexican. Okay, because now Mexico, the US, and Canada, whatever. But okay. So, but I was talking to the Starbucks people, and they were telling me, you know, we agree that we need no plastics or plastics of a single use. But we, the companies, are not ready yet to eliminate them and to make them really circular. So how do we, and this is a mission. The mission is to eliminate plastics by, I don't know, 2030, they say it's too soon. The government says it's too little. So that's where we need to sit down and say, okay, this is our mission, now let's go for it. And the private sector needs to come in and work on it. So in this book, and I have to tell you, Mariana, good news, some of the ideas of this book have now transcended to other sectors. For example, here we're talking about Chile and copper. But now Chile is thinking about lithium. Lithium to build electric batteries. And then we go to Mexico, and you mentioned here Monterrey, Nuevo León. Okay, no. Now we have Sonora, which is now going to be the center for energy, renewable energy, and to produce cars, because now the US, Mexico, and Canada agreed that a very important percentage of their cars should be electric. So this has been agreed upon the three governments. So actually, Mexico was not very keen on renewable energy, to tell you the truth. But with the push of the TEMEC or whatever, they had to do it. So and then you mentioned here other examples for which I think are very, very relevant. 100 cities that should become carbon neutral, for example, and we have now the 100 cities list. So this has become a reality in many places of the region, because they're rethinking about, and we can write number 2, edition 2, to put these new examples forward. And you mentioned Claudia from Bogota.
Yeah.
That's the care economy. Yeah. The care economy, which is very productive and very important for women. We need our time back, and we need it to be paid, by the way. We don't want to continue working with unpaid rules of law. So let me stop here.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Mariana.
I just realized there's no microphone on this clip. I think there is? Okay, sorry. So thank you also for mentioning the lithium example, because that's exactly both a good thing and a problematic thing, right? So lithium, in order to extract it to create these electric cars, actually uses a huge amount of water, and it's very resource intensive, so the whole natural resource curse. What does it mean to look at that not as a sector, but as a sector that needs to transform, change itself in order to have, again, a different direction for the economy to be more sustainable and inclusive, like the debate in Chile, like the debate also in Germany, where the KfW's loan program under the Energiewende program all of a sudden required old sectors like steel to lower their material content of production in order to get a loan, because there was actually a vision at the top. The problem is, if there is no vision at the top, all we have are guarantees, subsidies, and handouts, and no transformation. So, Shiva.
Thank you very much. So since we are celebrating, I would like to really also give my personal thanks to Mariana and also on behalf of the EIB. Now, our journey started, our collaboration started 10 years ago at a rather dull European Commission conference, where Mariana gets up, and as you can imagine, also everybody is awake, and tells us about the entrepreneurial state. And really, I have to say, we all left the room feeling much better about ourselves as civil servants or as bankers working for one of these EU bodies and institutions. What, however, struck me is, and she did it again, she mentioned pretty much every other development bank in the world but the EIB. And I was just struck thinking, what is it that doesn't bring us into the narrative? Now, that presentation came at the right time in my personal journey at the EIB, because I was just tasked to set up the Innovation Finance Advisory team and activity in the bank. And what really struck me is that, and I have to say in this country in particular, but across Europe, very often the EIB was told, well, stay out unless, because you could be crowding out the private sector, just make sure you just stay within, come in when we need you, but don't go beyond. And coming into that role, looking at how we actually foster innovation and make sure that Europe stays competitive and that we get the right technologies, it was precisely that narrative of actually rethinking what is the role of a public sector bank. And it's not about just de-risking, but it's actually about really creating the directionality. It gave me a whole new narrative. And I think what was beautiful is that, this became actually part of the mantra that the whole team was, I think they all had to pretty much read her book. As you can see, I've read it many times and it's, falling apart. But what was then nice, you've seen I don't have the physical version, but it does exist, but it's also on our website. The report that Mariana and her team did on then looking back at how the advisory function brought more mission orientation into the EIB. And maybe just very quickly, the 3 key recommendations that she gave us, looking then at our journey and our role, was, make sure EIB, you look at advisory as part of a strategic asset where you are building knowledge. Don't outsource it to consultants, but really internalize. Make sure you build that knowledge and make the most of it. Second, use advisory as a change agent within as well as outside for ecosystem development. Within, looking then how we actually played the role of bringing, I would say, mission orientation to financing circular economy. And through that activity, helping companies to become more circular and bringing financing to it. The third recommendation was that insight that you get through that knowledge, through those 2 first activities, you can actually use to develop the right financing instruments so that the EIB is always fit for purpose, innovates, and provides the patient capital that it actually has, is managed to do, while keeping its AAA rating. So I guess we want to have a cake and eat it. So, and I think these sort of mindset actually, and that's where I stopped, led us to develop. And I think Mariana, you do take the credit for having inspired me certainly. Develop a financing facility for infectious diseases back in 2015, when infectious diseases were really, people thought it was very esoteric. So we set up the facility with a very strong risk sharing with the European Commission. But then when the pandemic hit, we had the instrument, and within a few months managed to actually invest 100 million in BioNTech, one of the vaccines that many of us have had the benefit of getting. So meaning it is that being prepared and developing those patient capital instruments that was so critical for us as a bank. Yeah. So I guess I stop here hoping that next time in her narrative she does mention the EIB whenever she has. So please let me know if she does. I stop here.
Yeah, we actually talk a lot about the EIB precisely because of the experience working with you. So there's no one form of a bank, but how we govern it matters. And by the way, I should have said this before, I think it's obvious, all of the work that you're hearing about today required a huge amount of collective effort. So the postdoc, for example, that was working with us on that project, Olga Mikiva, but also, as I mentioned before, Dan Wright, who's worked with us on the Camden project, George Dibb, who helped us coordinate the Moist Commission that you'll hear about from David, Laurie McFarlane, who helped us set up the Scottish National Investment Bank. These are all amazing individuals who gave up a lot of time working with us, not only as academics, but actually on the ground as practitioners. And that's one of the things we're most proud of actually being able to hire the troops on the ground, not just the thinkers and the students. So thank you so much. Nicola.
Thank you, Mariana, and I will also begin by paying tribute to you and congratulating you on the 10th anniversary of the book. We started working together actually probably not long after the book was published 10 years ago. When I became First Minister, I invited Mariana, amongst others, to join my Council of Economic Advisors. It's fair to say I thought I was a shock to the system of the staid, small c conservative men who tended to populate bodies like that, and then Mariana walked into the room and suddenly I didn't seem as big a shock. There was method in my madness. But back then, the voices arguing for a much more activist, market-shaping industrial policy and strategy were in the minority, but I think it is a tribute to Mariana and this institute that those voices today are much more mainstream. We see what's happening under Biden in the US, the response to that from the European Union. I think there is a danger the UK is being left behind in that, and it is a very real risk and danger, which is why I think what we are seeking to do in Scotland, albeit on a globally small scale, is important for our economic and social future, but hopefully provides some form of example as well. Mariana's question was, why is the entrepreneurial state important? And given I'm a politician, we always like to answer questions directly. I'm going to try to do that. I'm sure every generation thinks and claims this, but I think this one can do it with some degree of validity. The challenges we face right now globally are enormous. The climate transition on its own is huge and daunting and overwhelming. We are not going to meet those challenges without very clear-sighted purpose and mission, and we're not going to be successful in delivering those missions without genuine public-private partnership. And I say genuine because I think in the past when we've talked about public-private partnership, it has tended to be a misnomer. What that has meant is almost a passive enabler government public sector, de-risking the private investment, filling the market gaps, and the private sector, sure, investing itself, but tending to take the rewards and often not having the accountability it should have for the impact of its activities on wider society and the environment in particular. And that model of partnership, to some extent has created the challenges and the problems that we are dealing with today. So we need to do it differently. It has to be a partnership worthy of the name. We talk about a green deal. Deals are reciprocal. So we need to understand what the reciprocation is. And I think the time for this is absolutely now. The state and the public sector contribution should be about helping to achieve those missions, but in a way that delivers wider socio-economic benefit that leads to a better skilled population, a country with a stronger focus on R&D, to be blunt, higher wages for the many, not just higher dividends for shareholders, and a much stronger focus on protecting the environment for the future. So briefly, just I think three things I would mention from Scotland's example. The National Investment Bank, which Mariana was instrumental in helping us design and implement, a mission-orientated state bank providing patient capital and trying to do that directional market shaping. And then the next two examples are really about applying conditions, introducing the concept of conditionality to our industrial strategy. Scotland, which is a combination, it's a strapline for a number of offshore wind projects that will deliver up to 28 gigawatts of renewable energy for Scotland. To put that in context, that is double our installed renewable energy capacity total right now. And we've applied conditionality around supply chain investment. So need to go further than that, but that's an important step in the right direction. And lastly, something called Fair Work First, where any company getting government grants or government contracts needs to sign up to a number of fair work commitments, paying the living wage, recognising and trade unions, collective bargaining, training and skills for the workforce, recognising that without well-being in the workforce and wider population, we're not going to deliver any of what we set out to do. And final point is none of this is easy, even as it becomes mainstream. In Scotland, the biggest pushback we've had is from people, including some, not all in business, trying to characterise this new vision of public-private partnership as being anti-business. So vested interests will push back, and they'll push back hard on this, which is why the more voices we can get here in this debate, the better.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for also just mentioning the word deal, because exactly as you say, we need to define what kind of deals. Economists tend to be quite lazy with words like partnership or ecosystems in a way that biologists aren't. They will define if the ecosystem is parasitic, symbiotic, mutualistic, predator-prey. so on and so forth. So I think part of what this conditionality work, which I'm sure we'll come back to in the discussion, does is actually force us to be clear, right? Can we have metrics about what a symbiotic deal actually looks like in the same way that we have ESG metrics, notwithstanding the fact that there's a lot of greenwashing around them, but still they're there and we can improve them. We actually, it's amazing, have very few relational metrics. How is the AstraZeneca vaccine produced with Oxford different from how the Pfizer vaccine was produced, precisely around these public-private relationships? David.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me along. And of course, it's wonderful to celebrate this 5th anniversary and the 10th anniversary. But my engagement with Mariana began 12 years ago, in 2011, when she brought out the original pamphlet, the Demos pamphlet on Entrepreneurial State. And the pamphlet was so successful it led to the book, and now Mariana is a kind of economics rock star. So I've tracked this small pamphlet to Mariana's role now. And I can still remember the excitement of reading that pamphlet. And for me, the two most powerful messages from the pamphlet and then the book were first, this wonderful feeling of liberation from an incredibly stale market failure model of trying to assess public projects. And the market failure model had become more and more complex, like the way before Copernicus, the Ptolemaic system was preserved by ever greater elaboration. And the market failure model had become ever more elaborate. And one reason why it was become so elaborate is they kept on trying to smuggle in what Mariana showed to be blindingly obvious. By and large, people go into politics and also go into the civil service in order to do things, in order to try to make things better. And the reason why I think Mariana has had such an effect on people working in government, in public policy, from a range of different political viewpoints, is it just rings more true about what people are trying to do. So the mission replacing the market failure model. The other thing that I found really illuminating was Mariana's reinterpretation of what they do in America. And it is a very different picture of America and American engagement in mission-oriented policy and support for technologies than you would believe from some of the American rhetoric about themselves. And there is, of course, a literature which she uncovered about the hidden developmental state. She showed what really Americans do, which absolutely chimed in what every business leader returning to Britain from America told you about what America did, but didn't tie in with what some of the America's own rhetoric was. And so my interpretation of that was that there's a kind of Jeffersonian rhetoric of the sturdy individualist yeoman farmer, and behind it there is a Hamiltonian state doing stuff. And indeed, of course, Hamilton the musical is Mariana set to music. It is the same message. It's the entrepreneurial state converted into operatic form. And so for me, it was a reinterpretation. And I have to say, that point is quite handy for people like me who, I have to confess, I move in conservative circles. I talk to lots of conservatives. And with my party endlessly agonizing about industrial strategy, I always found the best single thing to say was, don't worry, this is what Republicans do in America. It's fine. It's what they all do. And that is, I happen to think, I found that quite a persuasive argument. I got it from Mariana, so thanks very much for that. And then finally, I find myself working with Mariana on our commission. And it was really Greg Clark who wanted us to work on the commission together, and I think it did inform his industrial strategy document that was then produced. And now, working with Mariana is very tough. And I had a battle to fight because Mariana had got supporting general purpose technologies as one of the bad things that was done in the bad old days and had to stop. And my view was that actually you could only deliver missions if you had prior investment and co-investment in technologies which were general purpose technologies without your necessarily allocating a purpose or a mission to them. And I did have very politely to point out that when Kennedy went for the moonshot, there had been prior investment in rocket technology, without which just sitting in the White House saying, let's get someone on the moon, wouldn't have got us very far.
Yeah.
So Mariana and I painstakingly worked through what I think in that commission report is a shared understanding that you both need the pull of missions and the push of general purpose technologies that enables you to deliver them. And even if we couldn't reach an agreement in the meeting room over Prosecco afterwards, we got to a conclusion. And I really enjoyed working with you then, Mariana, and I so admire what you do.
Thank you. Thank you. So those commission meetings were fantastic because they were actually in our meeting room, which had a table as, I guess, wide as this room and 30 people around them. And once, the reason Brian Eno's up on the screen is not only because he's on our advisory board, but he also sat in on those commission meetings. And I still remember once he said, so, on this future mobility mission you guys are talking about, why do you keep assuming it's good to go faster between point A and point B? What if you just want to relax and look up and experience the world? Like, all right, put that in the mission. And actually the Sustainable Mobility Mission, which Dan Hill, of course, who's here in the audience, he's one of our honorary professors and was part of the commission, has tried to do is precisely to be super ambitious on something like a sustainable mobility mission with specific criteria like 100% accessible mobility, which would mean that some of those bottom-up projects that need to be crowded in would be in the world of disabilities. So that kind of constant, not tension, but dynamic between sort of top-down kind of direction, but bottom-up experimentation across the whole economy to achieve those homework problems was such a great thing. And I think that was a misunderstanding. It wasn't about not supporting general-purpose technologies, but these siloed ways to think about technology is what we were trying to... Anyway, we won't start a debate again here. So I thought maybe we could just have a bit of a round two, but more of an open discussion based on a question that came up today in our MOIN, Mission-Oriented Innovation Network session, where Kate Roll, one of our amazing professors, is she here? No? Maybe? No? Asked, what does all this then mean for the curriculum? What does it mean for the capacity on the ground? So I don't know if it's possible just to kind of do another round on what are the lessons in terms of both the, not necessarily missing capabilities, but the much needed capabilities, the training that the work you've done, whether it's on Scott Wind, on the EIB, rethinking risks and rewards, portfolio setting, the industrial strategy work, but also your 8 great technologies. Pamphlet itself was hugely influential. The catapult experience here in the UK. What's kind of missing that we should actually be focusing on? Because it's those pain points, it's the bottlenecks. Because otherwise, if it's so easy, we'd all be doing it, right? We would have directed, inclusive, sustainable growth and ambitious industrial strategies and great public banks that steer the way. But we know that's actually not the case. So a bit more on the bottlenecks, but also given what the Institute's trying to do and the students in the room, what have you learned in terms of the tools, the instruments, the training, the creative bureaucracy side of things, using Reiner's words? So it doesn't have to be in the same order, but yeah.
Yeah, let me start by saying that I believe that there's one thing we need to do, and that is teamwork. I believe that the individualistic society we are living on and the scientific environment, the science, is always individual. You have to write a paper. You have to compete with the other. If you don't write your paper with you as an author, you don't progress in your career. I think, how do we change this mindset? And how do we evaluate the collective action? Because the only way to think about a mission is collectively. This is what you have done with your 60 people around here. And they all deserve recognition. But that's one thing that I really believe we need these skills in it, and our education is exactly going on the contrary way.
Interesting.
So I am a biologist by training. I know it sounds very strange, because then I headed an economic institution. I also study economics. But language, we need to learn other languages. When I saw an innovation ecosystem, I thought, okay, I can understand that, And when you talk about parasitic and symbiotic, and I said, okay, I do understand that. And not only that, is because nature has lessons to teach us about how the relationship between the life occurs. And we are not always the center of the world. I mean, probably we're going to disappear and the planet will continue. So anyway, but my third reflection is that the world is completely different from what it was 10 years ago. So you need to rewrite with your team, I think, Entrepreneurial State number 3.0, I don't know, but I mean, in which the world has become completely different in terms of wars, in terms of climate, in terms of water. And one of the things that I admire from you, Mariana, is that you have gone through health, not to hell, but to health. No, not to hell at all, not to health. You are now heading the Water Commission. So I really believe this, thank you, Lucas, because this, I am also with you there, and this is really important. Why? Because you are transforming the concept of water as a local problem to water as a public good, which is the hydrological cycle, the one we need to protect. Not the little water that we have here, but the water cycle. So thank you for that. And talking about water.
Yeah, talking about water.
I will give you water.
Thank you.
And here is the report.
Yeah. So Nick Stern did climate, Das Gupta did biodiversity. We together are doing water. The co-chairs are myself, Tarman, who you saw on screen, and Gazio Conjawila, head of the WTO, and Johan Rockstrom, and the commissioners, including Alicia, have been fantastic in bringing, again, that global experience and the rethinking of the global governance of a common good. Thank you.
So maybe three points for consideration. One, and we did many studies, which you can see on our website, what are the bottlenecks financing innovation? And one of the key things has been very often that we need more finance in science and more science in finance. What we mean is these two communities need to be able to speak each other's language, because it comes down to risk perception. Very often, we have experience as bankers when we have these wonderful entrepreneurs in front of us telling us about all this technology, and we're just thinking, how will we ever get our money back? So that's point number one. Two, and this is going to this entrepreneurial state, we need ultimately people in our organizations, I mean, this is now in the public sector, but equally I think for the private sector, that have actually straddled, have worked in both. That ability to actually have a mental fluidity, to really think from both perspectives is absolutely critical. And then third, and I just add, because we had a wonderful discussion at a breakout, we need to bring in a gender lens into anything we do, because we are living in a world that was designed by men, for men. I mean, I'm quoting Caroline Perez, Invisible Women author, and, there is such a great opportunity we have to really bring in that lens to everything we do. And I think, including mission, to bring in a mission orientation, we need to bring in the other half of the population and all of that into it. So.
Yeah, and what's interesting with gender is it actually runs across all the Sustainable Development Goals.
It's not just one. Number 5.
Many of the rapes that happen in many countries are when young girls have to actually go fetch water, right? So water, missions, and gender parity actually are deeply related. Thank you. Nicola.
Yeah, I firstly totally agree with the point about seeing everything through the gender lens, but as you rightly say, in so many parts of the world and so many of the challenges we're talking about, it's women and girls who disproportionately carry the burden, and unless there is an understanding and appreciation of how women and girls live their lives, we're not going to devise solutions that will help to tackle these challenges. In terms of what do we need to do, so 2 points I would make, one mindset and one practical, which flows from mindset. I've grown up, and many people in this room will have grown up, certainly in the UK, with you hold one or other of quite polar opposite attitudes, either public sector good, private sector bad, or the opposite, private sector good, public sector bad. We need to move away from that and understand the importance of the relationship and the partnership and the collaborations on a meaningful level. For business, that means accepting that being asked to be more responsible, to contribute more back, is not anti-business. It's a recognition of the fact that business sits in a wider societal ecosystem. The health of the population, the well-being of the population, the skills of the population, the quality of the environment determine how successful businesses are able to do. And for the public sector, and particularly for government, and I know this is something Mariana and I have talked about over the years, governments badly need to build the capacity to be the partners that we're talking here about them being. Because often the inequality comes from the fact that the expertise and the knowledge lies on the private sector side, and governments over the years have lost a lot of that because outsourcing, consultancy. Mariana was very frustrated, rightly, in the work to establish the National Investment Bank, that the Scottish Government went to external consultants to do a lot of the design work and the due diligence work for us around that, rather than have that in-house. So if government, public sector more widely, is going to be the active partner that we're talking about here, it badly needs and quickly needs to build up the capacity and the skills and the expertise to do that. And I think that has knock-on messages and lessons for our skills agencies, for academic institutions, about what exactly we are seeking to equip the next generation of politicians, civil servants with, and I think that's urgent and important.
Interesting. Pooja Agrawal, who I'm not sure if she's in the audience, but she runs Public Practice, an organization trying to bring back designers and architects into city councils. She's an architect herself, actually having graduated from the Bartlett. She told me this crazy statistic that it used to be, I always exaggerate with numbers, but something like 60% of architects work for the city. Now it's 0.7, so less than 1%. So that brain drain from city councils for thinking about kind of urban planning. Similarly, QCs, or now KCs, legal expertise. So kind of bringing back that expertise, whether it's urban planners or legal expertise in, but also nesting that training within the education, something, again, very dear to our MPA program. Can I also recognize, I just see some people in the audience who actually help fund many of our programs. So for example, the Policy Lab, where we're trying to sandbox some of these tools like outcomes-oriented procurement, was funded with a very generous donation from the Loudest Foundation. Leslie is here in the room. Anyway, David.
Yeah, I mean, just two comments about sort of capacities and the connections that need to be made. First of all, I think one of our problems in England is just the way our education system drives early specialisation. The Scottish education system is better. And one of the reasons why we had that kind of tension I was describing earlier between challenges and technologies is that by and large, and it remains the case in the British system today, the people thinking about challenges are unlikely to have got any deep scientific or technological understanding. And the people working on the technologies are unlikely to have looked at them or thought about them in the context of any wider social or economic role. And that's partly because in England, at about the age of 15, they will have been driven to make a decision to go down one route or the other route. And I have to say, some of the less satisfactory meetings I've been in on missions and challenges have been just people sitting around chatting about what would be a nice idea if something were better in the world. That isn't sufficient for setting a challenge. It has to be related to some kind of understanding of what the technical and other capacities are and how they can be harnessed. So that's one area we need to make a connection. The other area we need to make a connection, and again, this is, I think, sometimes a bit uncomfortable for us, is with people working on national security. One of the most important missions for most national governments is for their nation to be safe. And I was for a time a trustee of the Science Museum, and I thought a message that we underplayed in the Science Museum was how many of the inventions and developments we were celebrating were actually driven by the impetus of conflict. And that remains, I would say, as much a driver now as ever. I suspect there have been more advances in drone technology as a result of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict at a greater speed than happened in the previous 10 years. And there are people thinking about missions, often behind a set of security arrangements, and one of my aims was always to get more of my officials working on technology to have the security clearance to be in the same room as the people working on technologies from a much more security-oriented perspective. But the security community do completely understand missions. They would say they have a really important national mission. They're often themselves trying to set targets for themselves. They're often trying to do things like innovating procurement. Incorporating them and their insights in these conversations, I think, would also be very useful.
Very interesting. That actually reminds me, we once did a study comparing the SBIR program in the US, which is a procurement program where every department needs to spend between 3 and 5% of its budget to procure innovative solutions from small enterprises, and the equivalent program in the UK, SBRI. Not very creative in terms of, a new title. And the biggest difference was who was evaluating the applications. That in the US actually had scientists who knew something about these areas that companies were saying that they were going to work in. But then the next question is, why would a scientist want to also work in government? So that kind of brain drain that we've seen in many parts of the world, both because of pay, but also the kind of constant bashing. And one story we often tell is that, it wasn't a coincidence that a Nobel Prize winning scientist, Steve Chu, ended up agreeing to run the Department of Energy in the US post-financial crisis, because he wasn't told, oh, come in and design a carbon tax or de-risk Elon Musk. The idea was, come in and help us steer an $800 billion stimulus program. He's like, I'm there. And so, by the way, while here we were doing austerity. Anyway, so that kind of, how do we actually attract talent into government? This whole idea of missions and what is the remit of the civil service? How can we talk about, again, value being co-created, sharing risks, but also mission setting, steering, while enabling bottom-upness. That attracts talent. One setting that I should have mentioned in the beginning, I forgot, was that, the reason this debate is so important is, in theory, the state is back, in quotes, right? You have The Economist even having that in their front cover. But that doesn't mean anything. Budgets come and go. I mean, there's a huge amount of money being spent. There's over $2 trillion in the US, same amount in Europe with the next gen EU, actually much more in the US, but still, these are huge pots of money. But if they land on dry soil where we don't have the capability to govern and to implement policies, it's a wasted opportunity. So really what I think we should be seeing or should be advocating for is that when we have these big recovery programs, they be accompanied by investments within that capacity development, that creative capabilities we need in the civil service. Otherwise, we can't spend it. In Italy, where I'm from, historically, even pre-COVID, sent the money back to Europe with the structural funds because that implementation capacity was not there. And I see some of my South African colleagues in the audience. I often hear from you that there's no lack of great ideas in South Africa. There's an implementation deficit. And the work we're doing with Mizzou and at the University of Wits around that theme, capacity, the kind of capacity we need for a just green transition is very much inspired by also your work. So I know I've been told that no questions. I'm going to go against the grain and just say the students in the room, the MPA students, why don't I just take 3 questions from you that then we can have the audience reflect on. The reason we didn't do a Q&A is it would have just taken too long, and sometimes, and we wanted to, it's already a very short session actually. Yeah, so come on. If you don't raise your hands, we're just going to keep blabbing. Tristan, question. I'm going to do the teacher.
Good.
And Patricia as well. Nye. I'm trying to ask her. Kino.
Maybe it's a question that's a more applicable to former First Minister Sturgeon. In regards to when setting up the Scottish Investment National Bank, what was kind of the idea or the driving force towards, getting this productive funding out to organizations? Was there an idea of, setting certain challenges and gathering the interests of certain organizations that were willing to, support certain initiatives that, the Scottish government has priority areas, and, finding organizations that were willing to, come up to the task?
That's why we said no Q&A.
Yeah, so my question was, with Mariana as well, like setting that up, what was really the goal in determining how would you prioritize the challenges for the funding?
Great. And just because the mic's there, you want to, one in the back? Anna.
Thank you. Yeah, echo all the thanks for your thoughts so far. When you have been persuaded of Mariana's ideas and you're then thinking, okay, this is amazing, I'm persuaded, what have then been the challenges of going and persuading others? And what are your reflections? Have you tried it in one way and then it's not worked, and then tried it another way and been more successful? I'm really curious about how you've done that sharing of messages.
Awesome. One more? Or sorry, yeah, it's just easier. Is that okay? Or we could do 4 if then the questions are super brief and the answers at some point they'll kick us out.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, I have very specific questions about polarization and political cycles. This is something that we keep experiencing, and it was mentioned during the panel, and it's how to really achieve long-term missions that are always affected by those cycles and more and more polarized countries.
Okay, so we had one on persuasion, one on long-termism, a design of a bank or procurement program. The 4th?
Oh, I have a very small one. Okay.
Okay.
I would love to know if you could speak a bit about the joys or the excitements that you're finding in the entrepreneurial space. You know, we talk a lot about challenges. I would love to hear some of the joys.
That's nice. The orgasmic entrepreneurial space. Sorry, I was told not to tell dirty jokes, but okay. I think that's it. Is that, yeah? Okay, good. So, Nicola, would you like to take the one that was addressed to you?
Yeah, I mean, but firstly on the joys, I think David said this earlier on, most people come into politics because they want to do things. And actually, regardless of where they sit in the political spectrum, they want to do things they think are good, purposeful things to do. The joy of this is actually thinking that by doing things that we were talking about, by changing the models of industrial strategy, we can actually face up to and achieve some of these missions that we're talking about. And actually for most people in politics that's motivating and despite the challenges something really positive. And the one for me on the National Investment Bank, why did we want to set it up in the first place? To become more strategic and mission focused in terms of how we use public investment, and to make sure as we do that and crowd in the private investment, it's all adding up to more than the sum of its parts, because we're clear about what we're trying to achieve. And the bank has 3 overarching missions. Firstly, the net zero transition. The second one is related to place, about tackling inequality within particular parts of the country. And the third one is innovation. It's about driving innovation that is relevant across a number of different missions. These seemed pretty obvious to us actually when we started to think about it. The challenge is applying the rigour and the discipline to make sure that what the bank is actually investing in is meeting those missions and is doing so in a meaningful way. I should say the National Investment Bank in Scotland is still relatively small scale. It's still relatively young. It's got a long way to go to fully fulfil its potential, but I'm really extremely optimistic about it. I think it will prove to be, when history of this period is written, one of the most transformative things we've done in the last few years.
And the business pledge idea, which later developed into the fair, is actually key to just kind of name check my very good friend Lynn Rothschild, who's in the audience, who's actually been leading this inclusive capitalism agenda, which very much has that idea of a different relationship, not between public and private, but also embedded within how we govern finance, which is a big.
One final point, just to make, I know we're running out of time, on one of the other questions is about, we face this paradox at the moment where the challenges we face globally require long-term solutions, and yet our politics has never been more short-term and actually dysfunctional and broken, and that is a real difficulty. So part of, I think, what building institutions like the National Investment Bank, really recreating industrial strategy can hopefully do, is force on the political system that long-term approach that otherwise every other factor that we're facing right now is running in the opposite direction.
Anyone else on persuasion and joy?
I do. I mean, if somebody asked about why was I persuaded by Mariana?
She doesn't give you any choice.
No, that's correct. You don't give us a choice. And it was not in the Prosecco. We had that.
It was a Prosecco.
It was not the Prosecco.
We had a lot.
We had a lot. But not when you persuaded me. Yeah. You persuaded me first, and then we had Prosecco. But the reason is because we need progressive thinking. And when I'm talking about progressive thinking, I was coming from an idea in ECLAC that equality is a driver of growth. and it's not the result of growth, it's the driver. And women's, for example, equality has to be a driver as well. It's not the women victim, no. It's a driver. And that persuaded me a lot because you were able to put welfare in a very interesting perspective. The other thing you did for me is you brought authors like Polanyi, you know, when the Great Transformation. I think very persuasive. You put it in modern terms, and I think this is what we need today. Go back to history, put it back in a different way. And the joy and polarization, I think the way to emerge from polarization is precisely the mission-oriented approach. Bring about society, because the polarization today is between ideological positions. And what we need is to bring about a mission that brings, I would say, especially the young people together, because we need trust and we need hope. And we cannot always be, you know, victimized. And I think we need to really build among us the joy of working together, frankly, for a better world. And I'm not kidding. I mean, I won't see it because probably we'll be in wheelchairs when the world changes. But at least we will try.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, thank you. So David and Shiva.
I think there is a theme in the questions about what's it like, how does one do this in practice, how does one implement it? So just some quick observations. First, I mean, Mariana, with George Dibb actually, fought a heroic battle on the Treasury Green Book rules. But there still are actually really tricky Treasury rules which get in the way, incidentally, of us doing a proper SBRI like the US, because you can't procure stuff pre-delivery, you can only procure stuff. You can't do speculative procurement, not allowed under Green Book rules, is key to the US procurement policy. However, in my experience, one purpose of all these Green Book rules is to protect the freedom of movement of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. In other words, it's a device for saying no, but if you can persuade the Chancellor that this is something worth doing, suddenly the Green Book rules don't seem to be so tricky. So the Green Book rules are essentially a device for preserving decision-taking power in the senior levels of the Treasury, and you have to get something done at that level. First point. So very quick. Second point, going back to this issue, which I do think is important, is national competitiveness. Something I was closely involved in was persuading Boris that we should take a stake in OneWeb, which I think was an important strategic decision as one of the world's few LEO constellations. One of the really vivid political arguments is who is the minister who's going to stand up in the House of Commons and announce that this LEO constellation company headquartered in Shepherd's Bush has just been sold to France or to China? Who's going to do it, and are you looking forward to it? In other words, there are legitimate political considerations about national capacity, national pride. Then there was the long-termism question, and Mariana, and the long-termism, incidentally, I think is not just a problem amongst the political class, it's also a problem amongst the civil service, for a reason that Mariana's latest book is about, that the career processes in the British civil service have significantly changed. You are less likely to build your career within one department, building up expertise in that department. You're much more likely to build your career by moving around and seeking promotion in different departments. So civil servants have less expertise, or their expertise becomes process expertise, how to handle it, how to present it, and the substantive expertise weakens and they turn to consultants instead. So it's partly we should revert to rewarding civil servant incumbency, building up expertise. For politicians, something that really helps preserve long-termism is institutions. If you can, the catapults, which I modelled on the German Fraunhofers, had a fragile few years, but once they're up and running and they've got serious budgets, then if you can get an institution to do stuff and it survives the first few years, that's why it was such a tragedy that Greg Clark's Industrial Strategy Council was abolished so quickly. I think that was a terrible mistake, and it really would by now be contributing. There's something else you can do to protect long-termism, which is international agreements. Governments don't like breaking international treaties, and committing money to an internationally agreed program, with a life beyond the public expenditure horizons of an individual government is a great way of securing. That's why a large part of our British space budget is spent via the European Space Agency, which operates on a 7-year time horizon. It's why NASA, who themselves, because this is not a unique British problem, it's why NASA, who themselves have political vulnerability in the US, like having contracts with the UK Space Agency or ESA. Anything that you can tell legislators, we have a treaty obligation to continue to do this, do you really want to break that treaty obligation? International agreements bring long-termism.
That's very good.
Great, thank you. Was there something else? Oh, sorry, did you go?
No, maybe very quickly on persuasion.
Sorry, yes,
So one thing, I mean, we tried all sorts of things with Mariana and EIB, but what I would say is the following. Give her exposure, because she is a rock star. Give Mariana exposure. So we invited her to speak to our staff, and she just nailed it. We invited her to speak, and this is where...
And it's not me. We have 60 people in the Institute. We have 75 students. Hire them.
Yes. I'm coming to that. But basically, the other thing is the fear of missing out and the competitive vibe. I think what was very effective is when we invited her to speak to the to the CEOs of EIB and 5 of the promotional banks, the KfWs, the French, Italian, Polish, national promotional banks. And when our president and others saw that the others had actually totally bought into it and we were maybe missing out, now that really helps. And then actually and this I say because I really thought it helped, is actually to have that sort of collaboration where she does a piece of work, because we got more value for our money, than with many of the consultancy firms that we have hired. So I think I'm going to be very open on that this also helped, because she and her team had to actually get into the nitty-gritty of the EIB, and I think this was a mutual learning experience, of doing that. So, and then the joy is that hopefully we are better at recruiting people who may otherwise go to the private sector, because we always, and using that language that you're using makes the jobs at the EIB really sexier, more attractive. Yes.
Sexy bankers. Okay, well, thank you. I've been told we've actually gone over time, so I'm going to have to stop it here. And just a huge thank you to the panel, just incredibly different. So you are all invited for drinks downstairs. Unfortunately, you will not see the panel because they have a dinner to go to. We couldn't just let First Ministers linger. And so anyway, thank you for everyone for coming, and especially, again, the questions at the end were fantastic, but we know that these lessons, at least in the Institute, the PhD program, the master's program, these are living questions, and the placements that our students do are actually in the Scottish National Investment Bank, the EIB, different parts of the UK government. So this is a living conversation. Thank you so much.